Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on organizational happiness with Mohit and Lars, spectacular people, friends in many ways, but and super experts on one topic that is so needed today in the world. So thank you so much for joining, Mohit and Lars. How are you? I think Lars, you are in Copenhagen. Afternoon. And Mohit, where are you today? Welcome.
I'm in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. Thank you.
So how are things going in Copenhagen? Lars, I think that you have a good view from your office.
Yeah, we have a very nice view of the canals here from in Copenhagen. So it's a Monday afternoon. Autumn is just getting here, but it's still a beautiful sight and a little bit of long evening still. We're still enjoying the last part of summer, right?
Talking about organizational happiness, you know how to organize your work and happiness, right? So you're walking the talk. So welcome. Mohit and Lars, well, probably you all know, but if you don't, Mohit is the founding director of the Center for Executive Education at the United Nations mandated University for Peace in Costa Rica. And Lars, we met several times already and we're together with Gross Law Happiness. For me, is one of the top experts in organizational happiness and has a fantastic book that I recommend. And we're going to be talking about that. And he's been advising to many companies on how to actually bring organizational happiness to life. So we are in good hands today. I think this beautiful combination of peace and happiness is always resonates so much. And at some point, we all have to work. And for many of us, working is beautiful and we want to enjoy it. And today we are going to be talking about that. And then, of course, everybody is more than invited to keep learning and keep going, because on September 22nd, Mohit and Lars are leading this amazing course focused on organizational happiness with 4 sessions where you can go deeper and learn really the secrets of how to run this at your organization. But why don't we start from the beginning? How did you both met? I think that you both met at the University for Peace, right?
That's right. So believe it or not, Lars was actually a student in my course. So that's my claim to fame. But it was a positive leadership course about almost a decade ago now. And Lars had flown in from Copenhagen. And I really felt that right from that, it was a 3-day intensive workshop. And Lars clearly brought a lot of practical experience. He'd been the CEO of a company before. He'd done an executive education program through Harvard. And I think while Lars was very intrigued by the positive leadership, I would say, approach, he also was equally intrigued by the University for Peace established by the United Nations in Costa Rica. By the way, yes, it does offer a very nice weather contrast to when Copenhagen gets cold. So there were many motivations, and we ended up chatting after the workshop. It was the first time it was being offered, and decided that we were going to collaborate going forward. And so initially what we did is we collaborated on the positive leadership workshop, co-facilitating it. And this is where, Lars, I might be jumping ahead, but we both felt that when we talk about leadership and positive leadership, an underlying question that our participants always had is, what makes me happy? What allows me to flourish? And when I can get a grip around that, how can I offer the same conditions to any team that I'm part of, whether I'm an entrepreneur, a manager, a leader, or even if I don't have that hierarchy within a team, how can I help create the conditions for my team to be happy? And I will talk a little bit more about that word happy. So to a certain extent, the evolution of working together in positive leadership led us to think about, well, let's get to the heart of positive leadership, which is this idea of organizational happiness. So that's a little bit about our trajectory from meeting almost a decade ago to now offering for the first time organizational happiness as a live online workshop. Lars, what do you recall from
What do you recall? What is your view?
No, I mean, almost that decade ago, and we have all been on that magical mountains in Costa Rica, and we know how it is. But it is a magical place in sense of just being there, but also it's a beautiful place, a very facilitating place to learn something or dive into something with a group of people. So that I remember very clearly. I think you and I, Mohit, we use that word. It's a slippery slope. When you get there, you want to go back, right? You want to do more. And I know we have had many positive leadership workshops there over the years now, which is an amazing course. And I think now we got I think we, in some way, Mohit and I are complementing each other in a very good way. That's what we often see. I mean, Mohit coming from the learning background, being the academic, maybe you can explore a little bit more about that, Mohit, and then me coming maybe more from a practitioner side and say, how can we make this work in reality? How can we? And that combination, if you are stepping into a humble place with your expertise, it's really always turning out to be amazing, I think. And so in that sense, Mohit and I sometimes we call ourselves the dream team, or sometimes someone else calls us the dream team, or even the twins, but that's another story.
I've seen you in action, so I know what you mean. Yeah, and I love it. So this is fantastic because probably as part of organizational happiness, we'll have to talk about teamwork. So I was wondering, and actually maybe we can get into the topic. When we talk about organizational happiness, what do we mean? And actually, how do we experience organizational happiness? Is that possible at all? Some people think that one thing is life, one thing is work. So we don't even have to integrate. So what is organizational happiness? What do you have in mind, and why does it matter?
So maybe as coming from a slightly more academic point of view, I can kick off a little bit about my journey and my understanding of it. And then Lars can take over, because really what he's done is take some of the very powerful research coming to us from the field of positive psychology, and given his experience of working in organizations, he's contextualized it as, what does this look like? What does this framework look like when you're the CEO of a company or when you're working with a team? So very practical framework. So my own background, I actually studied industrial engineering and graduated in 1995. In those times, industrial engineering, a lot of the coursework was just looking at how do we make our factories, our operating systems more efficient. And there was some fascinating case studies. Companies like Toyota and Volvo were putting in place just-in-line systems. Then I had one course, this was at Stanford, on organizational psychology. And that course really gave me, I would say, that early insight is to when you work with, the framework they were using then was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And they were realizing that they've done so much work on optimizing the operations of, let's say, a car manufacturing factory. What would it look like to work a little bit on the motivational level? What would it look like? A company like Volvo was already providing a lot of job security. What would it look like to provide a sense of belonging? What would self-fulfillment look like at a Volvo factory? So they started playing around with those concepts, and the data was fascinating. Early days, again, this was early 90s. Some of the case studies had just been published. And I realized that, wow, for the last 3 years, I've been looking at things like queuing theory, and this is mind-blowing. So quickly, that was the path I followed. And again, Maslow was one of the early humanistic psychologists back in the 50s. More recently, so as I continued to follow the field, I was exposed to Dr. Martin Seligman, who I think his framework of PERMA, the 5 pillars of flourishing, was very powerful. It's something that we've incorporated into all of our courses at the University for Peace. And this is where I connected with Lars. Lars, when he came to the positive leadership course, connected also with PERMA. And over to you, what have you done with some of the research coming from the field of positive psychology as you think about organizational happiness?
I'll get back to that. I want to start in a little, or have another point of departure for this, because I think very often the challenge for us, also in this room here and the people that we meet, is very often to get from thinking about it, talking about it, to do something about it. Sometimes we call it being a change maker, or getting from strategy to action, or whatever terms we use. But it's almost like, I just heard this morning in another webinar I did, but it's almost like if you want to be a change maker, you can put it on Facebook, or you can scream it from the rooftop, but it doesn't make you a change maker or a feminist or anti-racist or whatever. It's what you do, and I think that's where that's where I want to take what you just said, Mohit. It's taking something that is quite complex, quite academic. It's a scientific, quite big area, and putting that into a framework that you as a leader and as an organization can use. Because I think we take something complex and we make it simple. Because if you want to introduce it to an organization, you have to make it really simple, because when you put it into an organization, you need to scale it to make that change happen. And there you need to have something very simple. So what we did with the happiness sweet spot, and can elaborate a little more about that, but that's taking cases, the science of happiness, some of the academics that Mohit mentioned before, and put it into a framework with 3 pillars and a happiness sweet spot in the middle. So we talk about purpose, the big why for organizations, all the stakeholders. We talk about strengths-based leadership, and the 3rd pillar is compassion. And these are the 3 pillars that we dive into for different organizations, also in the training that we're doing, and we're starting on the 22nd. It's not a one size fits all, but it's a framework that is simple to operate and work with for leaders and organizations.
So I think that the framework is pretty powerful. I've used it in a few companies already, and it's very straightforward. And there are 10 elements as part of the framework that are really, really important. So purpose, strengths-based leadership, and compassion. Before we get deeper into the framework, where do you start? Because we all know that many companies are going through engagement surveys. Some of them are going through M&As, transitions right now, so much chaos all around, with so many companies disrupted, industries. I mean, what's going on now is very unique. So actually talking about organizational happiness now is kind of super interesting. But can we talk a bit about where do you start? Do you start from the founder, the general manager, HR, this is marketing, this is a strategy? Who should be and who is normally the ambassador for and the internal change maker for a program like this?
And I think one thing that you just mentioned, Luis, I think is a very strong concept. That maybe you should start measuring, but maybe we can get back to that. And then I think when people ask us, where do you start? I think a good answer to that question is, I don't know. Because how would you know? I mean, you don't know all situations, you don't know every organization, but maybe you have a strong process that will lead you to a first step. I think I work as a trusted advisor and consultant, and I'm very careful of being too arrogant about advising on what to do. I think you have to look at the situation, understand the context, the people, and the context. But what we have done, Mohit and I, with some organizations, is that we have gathered together a core team of 10, 12 people. Normally it's some from HR and some from leadership, but a core team from the organization that understands the organization, where they are, the strategic challenges, things like that. And then we spent 2 days with them on training and scoping. So we train them in the concept. Maybe that takes around a day to get the concept and link it with the science and the business cases. And then the second day, we scope a game plan together, which allows you to go back and say, what's the first step that we should do now? Who should we get involved? Who's doing what? And sometimes we take the role as project managers or training in some areas, but that's another story.
And just to build on Lars's response, which I completely agree with, the general approach that we use when we're working with a leader or a client is, let's start with what's working really well in your organization. What are your strengths? And that becomes kind of the line of questioning to then build on what's working well, rather than I could well imagine an approach where a consultant goes in and says, okay, we're going to work with you on organizational happiness. Let's explore all the problems. That is not our approach. And for many reasons, we feel that there are certain areas that we don't necessarily want to focus on that will never be the organization's area where they need to bring things up. So it's very much in keeping with, Peter Drucker had this quote, the task of leadership is to create an alignment of strengths that makes the organization's weaknesses irrelevant. So we very much follow that approach as we work with our clients.
And maybe I can just, to answer the question that you asked 10 minutes ago, as what is organizational happiness? And I think one of the pictures you get, or the visuals you get when you really work with organizational happiness, is happier, healthier employees, which is a win-win-win situation. It's a win for the individuals in the organization. It's a win for the organization. And it's even, I think, maybe we're not spending so much time on this today, but it's also a win for society, right?
Yeah, and this is great, because there is rarely a direction where you want to get. How would you answer, actually building on this question, on this answer, how would you answer those who said, well, don't worry about my happiness, I take care of my own happiness? So actually companies shouldn't be taking care of people's happiness. How would you answer that?
Can I jump in? This is where I get a little bit reconnect with the theory, and I shared very briefly Seligman, and I said PERMA, and I just want to kind of spell that out and why it's so important that organizations are responsible for those 5 different pillars of flourishing. So PERMA is an acronym. The P stands for positive emotions. The E stands for engagement, which is knowing your strengths and using them. R is for positive relationships. The M of PERMA is meaning, the idea that our life matters more than just ourselves, that our action and work has impact on others. And the A of PERMA stands for achievement, a sense that I'm growing and I'm making progress. Now, the interesting thing, when I was first exposed to PERMA, I realized why my dad actually, when we used to take family vacations, he used to struggle sometimes. Because to a certain extent, on a vacation, it's easy to experience positive emotions. But the idea of using your strengths, the idea of your work having meaning, the idea of sensing that you're growing and learning through achievement, I actually find the workplace provides such a huge opportunity to achieve PERMA. By the way, we spend something like 1/3 of our waking hours at work. So it's a tragedy if we see work as a place where we can't be happy, or that's not the responsibility of the organization. I think it's so much the responsibility of the organization to offer us those conditions to experience what we now understand to be happiness. And sometimes in a vacation, I have to think about how am I doing those things that I understand are important, because it can be harder in times of leisure. So I would almost reverse the question, and I would say employers have a huge those conditions, because it's actually easier than going to, let's say, Disneyland. Lars, you might have a slightly different take on this.
Yeah, no, but I think it's a very relevant question. And I think I think you mentioned that, Louis, we are in a time of change, also in the way we use our language, also the way we talk about well-being, flourishing, happiness in the workplace. Because I think just maybe 5 years, maybe 8 years, depending on what geography you're in, it was something, if you stepped into a boardroom and you talked about happiness, you would have maybe 3 minutes of that conversation and think, what has that, where is the connection between the business that I'm driving and happiness? But I think now, and just to look at it in that way, we could look at that on individuals and then for society also, but the business case for organizational happiness is so good. I mean, it's now we have the cases, we have the data, we have the research, and you can build a business case for organizational happiness that makes sense to even in the boardroom or to the CFO. And I think that's a difference from maybe 5 years ago. That's how I feel. It's more, I'm received in another way when you talk about organizational happiness and even compassion in the organization.
So Lars, just to, there are a lot of viewers who are tuning into this. So just imagine that you have a 5-person team. You are an entrepreneur or the manager of an organization. And in terms of just to give you one aspect of the business case and what the data supports. So if your team, those 5 people are happier, right? They're more engaged in their work. They're using their strengths. They're feeling that their work matters. They're going to be sick less. That the data shows that they show up for work 10% more, or than they would if they were disengaged. And so just on that absentee data, you can start calculating what is it worth to you to have one of your team members show up these many more days. Now you multiply that out by 5, right? And that, like I said, I just picked one aspect of the business case, which is less absenteeism, less sick days. Then of course there's other studies that shows they're more innovative, they collaborate better, they have better ideas, they do better with customers. So the drivers of the business case add up, and it's powerful. And the data now supports, I think, what some of us knew intuitively. I think good leaders have always done this, tried to promote that kind of culture where people are excited to show up to work because they know it's good business. It's great to have the data to support this. One quick thing, I was just a few days ago looking at Gallup's engagement data, and I saw a headline that really caught my eye. They said engagement levels in the US workforce have hit an all-time high. So I was like, wow, this is maybe Lars and I don't need to do this course in organizational happiness in 3 weeks. The statistic was it had reached 40%, 40% in the US. So what about the other 60%? 47% are disengaged and 13% are extremely unsatisfied. So even at a moment, and I think my own sense is post-COVID, there was a lot of uncertainty when people went and started suddenly working from a different setup and virtually. I think people have settled down. They now have more flexibility. They're working from home. So I think happiness levels have gone up. And yet they are under 50% in terms of engagement. So the opportunity is still huge. Unfortunately, worldwide, the statistics are much lower, much higher levels of disengagement.
Yeah,
and I think it's a good point. I mean, Mohit and I, we couldn't build on this conversation forever, but but I think in there is for sure there is a mental health discussion in there somewhere that is not so much related to organizational happiness, but more on a society level. But also, I think the point is good because those figures show the amount of potential that you have in your organization already. what if you were able to find that key to just unlock 5%, 7% more engagement? I mean, just in terms of individual happiness, or even the business case, productivity, customer satisfaction, things like that. And I think that's a point with organizational happiness, that it's very often for me, it's all about unlocking potential that is already there. It's not a huge transformation or disruption or change. It's unlocking a potential that is already there, which is a much more lighter touch to an organization than a big transformation project. But the potential is great, and the business case is good.
I love the concept of unlocking the potential that is already there. I really like it. So let's build on that a bit. Just as an anecdote, I was invited to a board meeting 2 days ago, and it was all online. And during the meeting, normally you think of boards is really kind of official, around the table. Everybody's really scrutinizing everything going on. The perspective of seeing all these board members at home with the background, some of them with paintings, some of them with books, some of them with curtains, some of them with their own light. It was beautiful, because it's like, oh wow, you were humanizing the role of everybody, and suddenly everybody were facing the same issue, which is working from home, which is showing who they were. And many people don't feel comfortable just by showing the paintings and the pictures that you have behind. So I think that was beautiful from an unlocking potential, because suddenly, and maybe we can go deeper into the sweet spot and the framework, I felt a lot of compassion there. It's like, wow, everybody's facing the same. At the same time, everybody keeps working and keeps doing their best. So it was a feeling of compassion in many ways. And I thought about the framework, which is not easy to have compassion as part of any corporate frameworks. So how can we talk a bit more about the sweet spot, why compassion is important, and how do you use compassion to unlock actually the unhidden potential in organizations?
Sure. Maybe I could start it off, Mohit. I think compassion as a word in an organizational, even corporate context, is a word that even during the last 6 months has become more and more relevant. It comes with different wording. Sometimes we use the word empathy, kindness, altruism, things like that. And I think it also comes from some managers, because they find it difficult when you're not seeing your employees or not meeting your employees, or you're managing from a distance also, which is one thing. And another thing is that maybe you had to take some tough decisions, or not take those tough decisions, but anyhow, you need to feel that empathy or compassion. I just want to say, I think we talk too much about empathy in our leadership context, because empathy, we use it as the dominant or very important leadership trait for any leader at the moment. But I think empathy can be, and is in the definition, a passive thing. It's a thing that I feel you, I see you, but I'm not doing anything about it. That's the empathy thing. I mean, I have the empathy for you, but I think the compassion is a much stronger word. And this is where you actually put action behind the empathy. I think it's, what do you do about it? What's your burning desire to do something about what you feel, or release the difficulties of your employees? And I think you cannot have leadership without compassion. I don't think you can have real leadership without compassion.
You know, the interesting thing, Lars, to build on what you're saying, is that, again, just like maybe a few years ago, if you walked into a boardroom and talked about organizational happiness, the question mark would be, well, what about the business I have to run? Today, compassion might produce that same, I would say, reaction in people who are responsible for the bottom line. And this is where, we've looked at, and one of the studies I think we talk about in the workshop coming up is Google's study on psychological safety. When people feel cared for, when they feel that there's high trust, leadership really cares about them, that their opinion matters, right? That the compassion is evident, then an interesting thing happens. The team holds themselves at much higher standards to get the results, right? It's not an excuse, oh, I didn't do this because, my wife was sick. Because there are always excuses for not performing. When you have that kind of compassionate leadership, you hold yourself and others to much higher standards. So the accountability goes up. So actually, again, there is a business case for compassion. I hate to say that because that's not the reason to be compassionate. It's almost like if you invest in organizational happiness, if you invest in compassionate leaderships, then you get these results that we desire from a bottom line perspective, these narrower results. Right? So it's the means justify the ends, not the ends justify the means. And again, the reason I say this, when we think about the larger context of the organization we're in, it's the United Nations established University for Peace. The larger context is we have a common destiny. We're at a critical time. The sustainable development goals, organizational happiness directly contributes to the well-being of people on this planet. So I think there's a huge moral reason we need compassionate leadership and we need happy organizations, and it happens to produce really great results.
I love it, and I think the connection in this case with peace and the role of institutions such as the United Nations is very powerful, because even when Global Compact was created, I always remember this conversation at the UN in New York about out of 100% of wealth in the world, 50% is managed by organizations, and 50% is managed by countries. So if we don't focus on this topic of organizational happiness, we are missing 50% of what's going on in the world with wealth, with respect to wealth. In this case, actually monetary, financial wealth management. So this is fantastic. But I think that what you did, including compassion as part of the framework, is beautiful. Can we go deeper into compassion and motivations? Because I know that you have another tool, is the motivational.
I wanted to.
Can we talk about motivations and compassion? Okay.
Yeah, and I wanted to say about, because compassion, again, it can very often be something. And the three of us also participated in a larger discussion, I think last week, about compassion. But it's very often we lift it to a level where it's difficult to put into action. And I think for organizations, and I just want to say this, for leaders very much, they want to say, okay, so tell me what to do, or give me a handle, or something. And so sometimes you need to give that advice. And Mohit and I have been in those situations where it's not enough to talk about compassion as a concept, but it's what do you do? And sometimes I think there are two advices there. It's paying attention and be present, which is a very, very difficult thing these days because we are so occupied with everything online, right? So just that little thing would be about being present and paying attention. If you can practice that, it will lead you to be in a place where you're able to show compassion, maybe listen in a different way and understand other people. Then I wanted to, which is not a completely different thing, but I think we mentioned it in the beginning, we have a platform that we call Motivational Landscape, which is a platform that we developed with 10 questions linked to the happiness sweet spot, linked to the 3 pillars of the happiness sweet spot. So it's something that we use in organization when we want to create like a baseline. Maybe we do it in the beginning when we work with the core team and say, let's ask the employees, let's ask them 10 questions. And let's have the data so we can use that to figure out what would be the first logical step to take in this organization. What would be important conversations we need to have to cultivate organizational happiness. So it's really a pulse survey that we advise to do every month, and then you have kind of the link to your organizational happiness project or your ongoing conversations about that, and see how are things moving in terms of purpose, strength-based leadership, and compassion.
I love.
No, just to give you a sense, I mean, the questions are things like, do you feel like your leader cares for you or your organization cares for you? Do you feel like your opinion matters? That would be under compassion. Those are the example of the subjective questions that are part of those 10, but you can see, then you can, once you have the baseline, then you can track how people and groups are moving.
Can we talk a bit about, before we talk about the structure of this course going on in starting September 22nd. So I recommend everybody to start looking into organizational happiness. We share links. Can we focus a couple of minutes on what's going on now with organizations that is going to transcend post-COVID, if there is a post-COVID, because we don't even know if there is going to be a post-COVID at all. But what are you sensing? Where are we today with organizations and organizational engagement, culture building that is going to be helping us to transcend and move to the emerging world? Because we all feel that there is an emerging world going on now. Well, we don't know what's going to be. But I feel that when I see at the 10 questions, I see the sweet spot, I see at the motivation landscape, I see at everything that you are working on, that could become a really nice anchor in order to build the emerging future. But can we talk about what do you sense now that is happening that is going to help us transcend post-COVID, if there is post-COVID?
Very good question, Louis. Do you think that's a 2-minute question? It's a 2-minute answer? I think I want to, it's a very interesting both discussion, conversation. I think what I sense and feel from the people that I engaged with around this subject is that there is a deep interest in doing something else. And there is an interest in looking into how can you make something that we maybe 1 year ago, 2 years ago thought was a little soft and intangible, how can you make it more tangible for me as a leader? So and this is about maybe motivation landscape, maybe it's about having a simple framework so you know what to address. And this is also what kind of conversation do I need to have with my organization to be able to move them forward? And you can only know that if you ask for feedback. And I think in this period, there was a little bit of, not a little bit, I think for many managers, there was the last 8 months or 6 months loss. For some managers, they felt a loss of control or loss of even purpose or whatever. I mean, the whole world came down on you, right? In some sense, you could not go to the office and do whatever you. So the sense of finding, and you use the word anchor, I think that's a good word, Louis. I think what's the sense of finding a new anchor or something else or something new, a new way to to cultivate your organization, both in terms of cultivating the people there, but also your business.
You know, Luis, I think building on what Lars shared, everything has changed, right, in the world. You could argue between March and now. And I would say nothing has changed on the psychology of happiness and what we need, right? So what does that mean in terms of organization? So the book would be exactly the same. The framework would be exactly the same. Let's look at strengths and how are people using their strengths. And for many of us, because we're not necessarily, let's say, interfacing with the customer in the same way, we are, I'll take my case, I used to give face-to-face workshops at UPs, and I'm not traveling. I'm at home behind a computer. So I need to find new ways for myself to use my strengths in doing my work, and I need to enable my team to do the same. So from a leadership level, strengths-based leadership is still very important, and you have to figure it out again. For some people, it might be just the same. Maybe they were just doing the same thing sitting in an office, and now they're sitting at home. However, if we look at, let's look at the next piece, the purpose piece. I think a lot of people connect with the purpose of their work when they're together with their colleagues, when they're interfacing with clients, when they're, I have a good friend who's a soccer coach, right? And he's not working with his kids in the same way. He's creating videos. So his purpose is he needs to reconnect with that, because otherwise, he's not going to be as happy, he's going to disengage. So leadership needs to, it's the same levers, but they really need to help make sure that at a psychological level, those needs are still being met. And compassion, I think is a great one. We started with that. This is where, to Lars's point also, if I'm in the same room with people, if I'm having lunch with my team, if I'm interacting with them, there's so many more opportunities to say, Luis, that was a great presentation. Thank you for weighing in. Whether it's the recognition or the feedback, it just happens naturally. And I know, Luis, from your expression, how you're doing. If I'm working from home and I'm connecting on a Zoom call, I need more tools. I need more tools to figure out, you might have a situation where your kids are at home and your wife is working or she's traveling and you're totally stretched because the situation's changed. So how can I be a compassionate leader in the same way when your world has changed and I don't really have an insight into it? So I do feel that, yes, there are new tools to make sure that I'm connected to my team. And the motivational landscape, that pulse survey is a great way for me to get feedback on how my team is doing. So that quantifying of something like compassion, I think in this kind of environment becomes even more important. Even pre or post COVID, I do think that it's good to try things that are important. Let's get some data behind it, now more so than ever. And so I do hope that the fact that we're all now kind of disconnected will help our leadership to think more about what do we really need to flourish. And that could persist post-COVID when we're back, because there's a new understanding of what people really need.
Okay, so we have a couple of minutes left. Why don't we talk about tools and practical insights that somebody can learn when they go through an organizational happiness program? What can they expect? What are they gonna get? If I join, am I gonna get ready to actually start working on my company on organizational happiness? Can you describe a bit what is the process and what are we gonna get when we go through the course?
Lars, you want to go first? I'm happy to flip-flop. I think we complement each other really well.
Okay, I can. Yeah. So what we have built here is a 4-module course over 4 weeks, and I wanted also to say that I think that gives, instead of being in the same room for 3 or 4 days, of course it would be nice to be on the mountain in Costa Rica if we all could do that, but I think that thing about doing it in 4 weeks, sometimes it creates an even more relevant learning, because you go back to your organization, develop things, and come back and we look at that. So on that, we will have dive into the science of happiness, understanding what it is to get that platform to work from. Then we will look at the business cases, and we have some of the live cases that we have, Mohit and I. Then we're looking into the happiness sweet spot for your organization. How are you on the 3 pillars that we have discussed? Where would your sweet spot maybe be? And then at the 4th module, we're looking at how do you measure this? And what's your game plan for introducing it into your organization? And then after that, Mohit and I are offering a one-to-one coaching for each of the participants, just to kind of take that first step. I think that is so important.
I like that one. I like the coaching part.
Yeah, Lars, you said it all, and I just want to reiterate. At the end of the day, we ask the question, so what, after every session or concept. So what, in the sense, how is this interesting and relevant to you? And so really the journey of going through this course is you emerge with a plan, an organizational happiness plan that you can implement in your organization where there's a positive return on investment. That's the goal. That's what you emerge with. And the journey might look different. You'll have this international group of people who've come together for the same reason. So of course the network lives on afterwards. You get access to the motivational landscape. For 3 months, you can use the platform for your organization at no cost. Lars has written a book which will be kind of guiding the journey, and you'll get to keep a copy of the book, and you get a certificate from the UN established University for Peace. So we've tried to throw in a lot of different components into this, but frankly, I think the major one is you'll have a plan that you can implement for your organization.
I love it. So once you have the plan, from your experience, who normally signs off these plans at the company level? What is, I mean, you've seen many, and I know that you don't want to direct here, but who do you think is normally the one that says? And the second part of the question is, how conscious these leaders have to be in order to sign a plan on organizational happiness? So do we have people who are really struggling and say, oh my goodness, I don't know what's going on here, I need to fix this? Or no, I want to actually solidify what's going on and I want to build high performance? So do you have a balance here? Do you have a sense of who normally takes the lead on this type of program?
Yeah, so and of course there are all different kinds of cases here, but sometimes it takes a little effort to get together that core team, if that's the process that we need to. If sending 12 people to work with us, either online or in the same room, it takes a little bit of effort to spend 2 days on that plan. That means that someone bought into it with their heart and their money, right, or resources. And so that's a good start, I think, for an organization happiness plan. But then the next step normally in that, of course, it's a lot about communication when you start a project like this, to communicate some of the things we have been discussing today. But it's also the training of the leaders. There we sometimes feel a little bit of resistance when you meet the leaders the first time. It could be the notion that what happiness and work, it doesn't really fit together. Why should I'm sitting here spending 1.5 days training with Mohit and Lars. But what we experience here is, I mean, at one case we had 130 managers from one organization through 1.5 day in different groups. When all this ends, and if we have done our job good, I think they are able to take the next step without too much facilitation and support from us. That's what we have experienced, actually. So that's a push. But it's a cultural push also, I think, when you have been through training. So it's a push and a cultural change in the organization that not always have to be signed off by the CEO, but it has to come from somewhere, from the top, from the heart and of the CEO or someone that close there. What do you say, Mohit?
Yeah, I'll speak to our viewers who are watching now.
Yeah.
I think a lot of you are wearing very different roles, right? So some of you are interested in the topic and you may be as part of a team, not even in HR, you just like the idea. I think you can influence the adoption of the plan. If you're an entrepreneur, I know we work a lot with people who've started their own social enterprises. Having some positional leadership in your team becomes easier, and you still have to get the key stakeholders on board, right? You know that. So, and then of course, if you're in an organization that already is supporting you to implement or to join this process, you strategically within your organization would probably have a sense of which, who are the stakeholders, who are the champions. So I think while your journey might look a little different depending on the role you have in your organization, I would say that part of Lars and I's approach to this, part of our coaching, would be to think strategically, not to develop a plan in isolation of the reality of the context, right? And so, Luis, thanks for the question, because otherwise the plan can become like a paper you write at the end of a course. We're not interested in that. We're interested in something that gets implemented, of course. And so that's an important consideration.
Wow, so much looking forward to this. Anybody who is really focused on transformation, not just for the company, but actually for themselves, I think that the offer is fantastic. And I would personally join because of the coaching part. I think that's a really, really important part, because then everybody knows that they have the personal issues at some point in time. So I feel that the perspective, the plan, and the coaching makes this a really beautiful plan. And with the luxury actually not moving from home, because normally you have to travel a lot in order to get this type of workshop. So this is fantastic. I don't know if you have any final comments, but this was a really good conversation. I'm really looking forward diving a lot more into the sweet spot and inviting everybody to actually see and feel by yourself what this is. So thank you so much, Mohit and Lars. It was fantastic.
Luis, just want to thank you for the space you're creating around the world in different ways to have these kinds of conversations. Your ability to both create these spaces, invite people in a way. I've and I'm not talking about this one because, but all the ones that I've seen and been exposed to, you're very generous with your time and energy to create this movement. And so thank you for having us on, and thank you for your viewers. Hopefully, Lars and I, he mentioned that sometimes we're called the dream team. Hopefully we didn't put you to sleep. That's not the intention of the dream team. It's a different, but no, we do really care passionately about this topic, and hope to be able to be in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lars. Any final
Thank you
comments?
so much, Lars, for this great conversation. Thank you for having us.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Organizational happiness at the United Nations mandated University for Peace, September 22nd. And see you very soon. Take care and enjoy the rest of the hours of the day and the blue moon. I mean, the full moon. Today we have the full moon of letting go. So let go. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.